If someone raises their arm to block a blow, their bone leaves a permanent clue that a forensic expert can read centuries later. It's called a Parry fracture, and here is how it exposes a crime. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly fascinating intersection of human biology and forensic osteology, specifically looking at the forearm. We're going to see exactly how our bones grow, what they're actually made of, and how investigators use them to solve real-world mysteries. Let's get right into it.
Okay, take a look at the medial bone of the forearm right here. That's the ulna. And that exact highlighted spot, that is where a Parry fracture happens. Now, you might hear this called a nightstick fracture. It's a classic, highly characteristic defense injury. It happens when a victim instinctively throws their arm up, right? They're trying to protect their head or their face from an incoming strike. When an investigator finds this exact fracture on a skeleton, it strongly suggests interpersonal violence. Just like that, a biological structure is permanently transformed into a crime scene record.
Part 1. The biology of living bones, the weapon, and the evidence. Okay, let's dive into this by stepping back from the crime scene for a moment to understand the incredible biological composition that makes bones capable of recording such trauma.
You know, when we think of bones, it's so easy to picture that dry, brittle chalk you see in a museum display. But living bone, it is entirely different. It's a highly dynamic composite material that acts as your body's weight-bearing support system. Bone is actually anisotropic, which is just a fascinating term, meaning its resistance to breaking literally changes depending on the exact direction a load or a blow is applied. It's also viscoelastic, meaning its physical properties change based on the speed of the impact. Structurally, it's built in layers. You've got an outer membrane called the periosteum, a dense compact layer called the cortex, and an inner marrow cavity. This complex system reacts uniquely to every single strike.
And this brilliantly illustrates why it works so well. It all comes down to a perfect biological recipe. On one side, we have the organic component, which is primarily collagen fibers. Think of collagen kind of like flexible steel rebar in a building. It provides tensile strength, allowing the bone to yield slightly under stress without just snapping in half. Then, on the other side is the inorganic component, mainly hydroxyapatite crystals. These act a lot like stiff concrete. They give the bone compressive strength and real rigidity, even though on their own they'd be pretty brittle. But it's this exact combination, the flexible rebar and the stiff concrete, that allows your living bones to absorb impacts and resist breaking.
Part 2. How our skeletons grow, the biological clock. This brings us to the incredible detective work of determining a victim's age by reading their biological timeline.
We're talking about ossification here, how our bones literally assemble themselves over time. You can think of it like a biological countdown. Back in the 11th to 12th week of gestation, a fetus has around 806 individual centers of ossification. That's a lot. But by the time a baby is born, those centers have already started to fuse together, dropping the number down to about 450. And by adulthood, that number consolidates down into the 206 bones of the standard human skeleton. Because this fusion happens on such a predictable, reliable schedule, forensic anthropologists can use it as a highly accurate timeline to age a skeleton.
But here's the thing. Not all bones form the exact same way in utero. There are two totally distinct pathways. The first is endochondral ossification, where bone is essentially pre-formed in cartilage. The cartilage acts as a blueprint that gets gradually replaced by bone. Now, our primary evidence today, the long bones of the forearm, develop entirely this way. The second pathway is intramembranous ossification, where bone develops directly from fibrous membranes, completely skipping the cartilage stage. This is actually how parts of your skull form. For those endochondral bones, like the ones in our arms, growth is a highly localized process divided into three main regions. First, you have the diaphysis, which is the main shaft. Then you have the epiphyses, which are the ends of the bone. And sandwiched right between them is the metaphysis, which you probably know better as the growth plate. Bone length is actively gained right there at the metaphysis. And this growth keeps going until early adulthood, when epiphyseal union occurs, meaning the ends finally fuse to the shaft, permanently locking in the bone's final size.
Part 3. Mapping the forearm bones, the radius and the ulna. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we transition from general bone growth to the precise osteometric landmarks experts use to piece together a specific victim's identity.
Let's start with the radius, the lateral bone of the forearm. Experts map out some really key measurement points here. Watch how they measure from the proximal head, right at the top, all the way down to the tip of the styloid process at the wrist. They measure that maximum length, as well as the diameters right at the midshaft. Developmental milestones are absolutely crucial here. See, The radius shaft appears super early, right around the 7th week of gestation, but that distal end, it doesn't fully fuse until someone is 17 to 20 years old. These precise measurements and fusion markers are critical data points for osteometric identification.
And right beside it sits the ulna, the medial bone. This is the exact bone we talked about earlier, the site of that defensive Parry fracture. Key landmarks here include the olecranon, which is the bony point of your elbow, and the coronoid process just below it. For the ulna, experts will measure the maximum length from the olecranon down to the xyloid process, but they also take what's called a physiological length, measuring from that coronoid process down to the distal head. Just like the radius, its shaft appears in the 7th week and its ends finish fusing between 14 and 20 years of age. Literally every millimeter measured provides vital data.
Part 4. Solving a mock case, putting the evidence together. Let's move to and see how this builds from theoretical biology into a gripping, applied scenario in the field.
All right, let's actually walk step by step through a mock investigation. Step 1. Investigators recover an ulna at a scene. Their very first move? They assess the epiphyseal union. Basically, are the ends fused? This immediately narrows down the victim's age bracket. Step 2. Out come the calipers. They meticulously measure the physiological length of that dry bone. Then comes step 3, which is where the math really works its magic. They take that specific length and plug it into established regression formula, like the ones developed by Pearson or Trotter and Glaser. These mathematical formulas literally transform the dry bone length back into an incredibly accurate estimation of the victim's living stature. They can tell exactly how tall the person was just from holding their forearm.
So the crucial point is that while estimating height and age is incredibly accurate, the forearm and also give us major clues about biological sex. Now, this is considered a secondary application, mostly because bones like the pelvis or the skull are generally more accurate for this. However, the radius and ulna exhibit what's called size-based sexual dimorphism. Simply put, males generally feature larger joint surfaces and more robust bone shafts. So by applying rigorous metric analysis specifically to the size of those joints, rather than just looking at the overall length of the bone, investigators can confidently point their case toward the biological sex of the victim.
From the exact fusion of microscopic cartilage to a defensive Parry fracture sustained in a final, desperate moment, our skeletons are living archives. They are these incredibly complex, dynamic structures that meticulously record the timeline of our growth and the trauma of our lives. It really leaves us with a truly chilling thought to end our explainer today. Knowing that your biological development writes an unbreakable, permanent record of who you were and what you endured, what permanent story will your bones tell centuries from now? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for exploring the science with me today.